The last working radio in 300 miles crackled with static before dying completely in Kalen's weathered hands. He stared at the device that had been humanity's final thread of connection, watching as its small LED display faded to black like everything else in this broken world. Outside the abandoned electronics store where he'd taken shelter, the shuffling footsteps of the undead grew closer, their collective moan rising like a tide of despair against the shattered windows. 3 months had passed since the Great Silence, when every piece of technology on Earth had simultaneously failed without explanation. No smartphones, no computers, no cars, no power grids, nothing electronic worked anymore. Within days of the technological collapse, reports had begun filtering in through the last functioning ham radios about people rising from the dead, their eyes milky white and their hunger insatiable. By the time Kalen had managed to jury-rig this final radio from salvaged parts, the reports had stopped coming altogether. Kalen pressed his back against the counter, clutching his makeshift spear, a kitchen knife duct-taped to a mop handle. His once pristine engineering degree from MIT meant nothing now. All his knowledge about circuits and processors was useless in a world where electricity itself seemed to have forgotten how to flow through anything more complex than a flashlight. The bitter irony wasn't lost on him that humanity's greatest achievement, technology, had become its greatest vulnerability. The front door rattled on its hinges as decomposing hands slapped against the glass. Kalen could see them through the security grating, 7 or 8 zombies, their clothes hanging in tatters, their skin mottled gray and purple with decay. One had been a businessman once, his tie still loosely knotted around his rotting neck. Another wore scrubs that were now stained with substances Kalen preferred not to identify. They moved with that horrible, relentless purpose that had made them the apex predators of this new world. His stomach cramped with hunger, reminding him that he hadn't eaten anything substantial in 2 days. The convenience store's shelves had been picked clean weeks ago by other survivors, leaving only dust and the occasional overlooked can of expired cat food. Water was becoming a problem too. Without electric pumps, the taps had run dry, and finding clean sources meant venturing into zombie-infested areas. Kalen closed his eyes and tried to think. Before the collapse, he'd been working on experimental electromagnetic pulse research for a defense contractor. The timing seemed too coincidental, a worldwide EMP that knocked out all technology, followed immediately by the emergence of the undead. Someone or something had orchestrated this catastrophe, but the how and why remained maddeningly elusive. The glass finally gave way with a crystalline crash that echoed through the store. Kalen's eyes snapped open as the first zombie stumbled through the opening, its head tilted at an unnatural angle from what must have been a broken neck before reanimation. The creature's dead gaze fixed on him immediately, and it released a guttural moan that summoned its companions. Moving quickly but quietly, Kalen slipped behind the counter and made his way toward the back exit. He'd learned that running and screaming only attracted more of them, and in his weakened state, he couldn't afford a prolonged fight. The back alley offered better escape routes anyway, with fire escapes and rooftop access that the zombies' deteriorating motor skills couldn't navigate. As he eased open the rear door, Kalen caught sight of something that made his blood freeze. Across the alley, painted in what looked suspiciously like dried blood on a brick wall, was a message: "The awakening has begun." Technology was just the first death. MV. Below the cryptic words was a symbol he didn't recognize, 3 interlocking circles with lines radiating outward like a corrupted sun. Before he could process the implications further, a hand grabbed his shoulder. Kalen spun around, spear raised, only to find himself face to face with a young woman whose dark eyes held the same desperate intelligence that had kept him alive this long. She held a finger to her lips, then pointed upward. Above them, a fire escape ladder dangled just within reach. "Trust me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing commotion inside the store. "There's something you need to see." The woman's name was Zephyra, and she moved through the abandoned cityscape with the fluid grace of someone who had mastered the art of invisible survival. Kalen followed her across rooftops and through hidden passages, noting how she seemed to know exactly which buildings were clear and which ones harbored the shambling hordes below. Her medical bag, slung across her shoulder, suggested she'd been a student or practitioner before the world ended. How many others? Kalen asked as they paused on the roof of a 20-story apartment building, the city sprawling before them like a graveyard of human ambition. In our group? 5, counting you now. Zephyra adjusted her grip on the crossbow she carried, its modern composite construction making it one of the few weapons that didn't require any electronic components. We've been watching you for days. The way you handle yourself, the fact that you're still alive and thinking, that's rare now. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded Kalen too much of the fires that had consumed most of the city in those first chaotic weeks. Without streetlights or electronic billboards, the approaching darkness would be absolute, broken only by the occasional flicker of candlelight from other survivors' hideouts. Zephyra led him down through a carefully camouflaged roof access into the building's interior. The stairwell was dark and smelled of decay, but not the particular rotting meat stench that indicated zombie presence. This was just the gradual decomposition of a dead civilization, spoiled food, stagnant water, and the accumulated neglect of a world where maintenance had become impossible. Their destination was an apartment on the 15th floor, its door marked only by a small chalk symbol that Zephyra quickly erased after they passed through. Inside, Kalen found himself in what appeared to be a functioning command center, lit by battery-powered lanterns and filled with hand-drawn maps, salvaged books, and makeshift communication equipment. "Welcome to the Resistance," said a gravelly voice from the shadows. An older man emerged, his silver beard neatly trimmed despite the circumstances, his eyes sharp with the kind of intelligence that came from decades of solving complex problems. "I'm Thaddeus, former aerospace engineer, current student of humanity's greatest mistake." Two other figures materialized from the apartment's recesses. The first was a girl who couldn't have been more than 13, her bright green eyes too old for her face, her small hands competently cleaning what appeared to be a high-powered rifle. "That's Lyralii," Thaddeus explained. "Don't let her age fool you, she's saved all our lives more times than I can count." The second person made Kalen instinctively tense. Cassander was probably in his 30s, built like a linebacker, with scars crossing his arms and neck that spoke of violent encounters. His smile was predatory, and when he shook Kalen's hand, his grip lingered just long enough to be threatening. "So you're the tech wizard Zephyra's been tracking," Cassander said, his voice carrying an undertone of challenge. "Question is, are you going to be useful, or just another mouth to feed?" Thaddeus shot Cassander a warning look before turning to Kalen. "What's your assessment of the technological failure? We've been theorizing, but we need someone with your background to confirm our suspicions." Kalen studied the maps on the walls, noting the careful annotations marking zombie populations, resource locations, and safe routes. "It wasn't random," he said finally. "The simultaneity of the failure suggests a coordinated electromagnetic pulse, but one more sophisticated than anything I've seen. It would require technology beyond our current capabilities, or at least, beyond what we thought were our current capabilities." "That's what we were afraid of," Zephyra murmured, settling into a chair that creaked under her weight. "We found something yesterday that changes everything." "Show him, Lyralii." The girl reached into a battered backpack and produced what looked like a small metallic device, roughly the size of a smartphone but covered in symbols that seemed to shift and writhe in the lantern light. Despite the global technological failure, the device was clearly active, emitting a faint humming sound and displaying patterns of light that hurt to look at directly. "We pulled this from a zombie," Lyralii said matter-of-factly. "It was embedded in its skull, right behind the left eye. The zombie wasn't like the others, it was coordinated, intelligent. It was hunting us specifically." Kalen felt the blood drain from his face as he recognized some of the symbols from the message he'd seen in the alley. "Where exactly did you find this thing?" "Downtown, near the old research district," Thaddeus replied. "There's something else, though." The zombie had this clutched in its other hand. He held up a photograph, its edges burned but the image still clear. It showed a group of scientists standing in front of what appeared to be a massive underground facility, and at the center of the group, smiling confidently at the camera, was a woman whose face matched the initials from the alley message. Dr. Morvain Vex, Zephyra read from the back of the photograph. Principal Researcher, Project Lazarus, Helix Corporation. The apartment fell silent except for the distant moaning of zombies in the streets below. Kalen stared at the photograph, pieces of a horrifying puzzle beginning to fall into place in his mind. Project Lazarus, he whispered. In mythology, Lazarus was the man who rose from the dead. The Helix Corporation facility lay buried 3 levels beneath what had once been the city's financial district, its entrance hidden behind the facade of a defunct office building. Thaddeus had spent days studying architectural records and cross-referencing them with the photograph's background details, finally locating the building through old city planning documents that somehow Lyralii had managed to procure from the abandoned municipal library. Getting there required crossing 12 blocks of zombie-infested streets, but Zephyra had mapped patrol routes and identified windows of opportunity when the undead herds moved in predictable patterns. They traveled at dawn, when the zombies seemed sluggish and less responsive, moving single file through shadows and staying clear of the main thoroughfares where the largest congregations shambled aimlessly through their former lives. Kalen found himself paired with Lyralii for the journey, the girl's uncanny ability to sense danger proving invaluable as they navigated through the urban wasteland. She moved like smoke, completely silent, and seemed to possess an almost supernatural awareness of zombie locations even when they were out of sight. How do you do it? Kalen whispered as they crouched behind an overturned bus while a group of zombies wandered past, their vacant eyes scanning the area without interest. I listened to their breathing, Lyralii replied softly. It's different from ours. Shallower, more irregular. And they smell like copper pennies mixed with rotten eggs. She paused, her head tilted slightly. There's something else about them lately, though. Some of them are getting smarter. The observation sent chills down Kalen's spine, especially after seeing the device embedded in that zombie's skull. If someone was experimenting on the undead, enhancing them somehow, humanity's already desperate situation could become completely hopeless. The Helix building's lobby was a monument to corporate ambition frozen in time, its marble floors cracked from 3 months of neglect and scattered with the detritus of panicked evacuation. Elevator banks stood dead and useless, but Thaddeus had located service stairs that led to the basement levels. The access required keycards, but Cassandra's more violent approach to problem-solving had provided several options lifted from zombies who still wore their corporate lanyards. The descent into the facility felt like traveling backward through time and downward through humanity's moral evolution. Each level they passed revealed increasingly disturbing evidence of what Project Lazarus had actually entailed. Laboratory equipment designed for biological experimentation, holding cells that were clearly meant for human subjects, and computer terminals that remained frustratingly dark and silent despite Kalen's desperate attempts to coax them back to life. It was Zephyra who found the first intact research log, a physical notebook hidden in a desk drawer of what appeared to be Dr. Morvain Vex's personal office. The handwriting was precise, clinical, and absolutely terrifying in its casual discussion of human experimentation. Day 847 of Project Lazarus, Zephyra read aloud, her voice echoing in the sterile chamber. The reanimation process is now stable in 93% of subjects. The electromagnetic disruption field continues to show promise as a method of global technology suppression. Once the infrastructure collapses, humanity will be too disorganized to resist the transition to the new paradigm. Transition to what new paradigm? Cassandra demanded, his usual bravado subdued by the implications of what they were discovering. Kalen was studying wall charts that detailed the relationship between electromagnetic fields and human brain chemistry. She's talking about replacing human civilization entirely, he said slowly. Look at these diagrams, they're mapping neural pathways, showing how electromagnetic interference affects higher brain functions. The pieces were falling together with horrible clarity. The technological collapse hadn't been an accident or even a side effect, it had been the opening move in a carefully orchestrated plan to reduce humanity to a pre-technological state, making them vulnerable to whatever came next. The zombies weren't just reanimated corpses, they were the prototype for something worse. Lyralii had been exploring deeper into the facility while the adults examined the research materials. Her voice echoed back to them from somewhere in the darkness beyond the office. "You need to see this," she called, her tone carrying an urgency that made them all grab their weapons and hurry to find her. She stood before a massive observation window that looked down into a chamber 3 stories deep. The room below was filled with thousands of cylindrical tanks, each one containing a human figure suspended in some kind of fluid. Most were clearly dead, their bodies in various stages of decay, but others showed signs of movement, twitching fingers, eyes that tracked across the glass walls of their containers. "The next generation," Thaddeus whispered, his face pale in the emergency lighting that somehow still functioned in this deep level of the facility. "They're not just reanimating the dead anymore. They're creating purpose-built organisms." A soft chime echoed through the facility, followed by Dr. Morvain Vex's voice speaking through an intercom system that shouldn't have been able to function. "Welcome, survivors. I've been monitoring your progress through my facility with great interest. Please proceed to Laboratory 7. There's something I'd very much like to show you." The voice cut off, leaving them in silence broken only by the soft bubbling sounds from the tanks below and the distant mechanical humming of systems that operated despite the global technological failure. Whatever power source Dr. Vex had access to, it was beyond anything Kalen understood, and that realization filled him with a dread deeper than anything the zombies had inspired. Laboratory 7 lay at the heart of the facility, accessible only through a series of security checkpoints that had somehow remained active despite the global electromagnetic failure. As they approached each checkpoint, the doors opened automatically, as if Dr. Vex was personally guiding their passage deeper into her domain. The implication that they were walking into a trap was obvious, but the alternative, leaving without answers while the world died above them, was unacceptable. The laboratory itself was a cathedral of scientific ambition, its ceiling stretching 4 stories high and its walls lined with monitoring equipment that displayed incomprehensible data streams. At the center of the room stood a massive cylindrical chamber filled with what appeared to be a churning, luminescent fluid. Suspended within that fluid was a human figure, or something that had once been human. Dr. Morvain Vex emerged from behind a bank of computers, and Kalen was struck by how normal she appeared. She was perhaps 45, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and wearing a lab coat that seemed freshly laundered. Her eyes held intelligence and purpose, but none of the madness he'd expected from someone who had orchestrated humanity's near extinction. "Please, don't be alarmed," she said, gesturing for them to approach the central chamber. "I know this must be overwhelming, but everything I've done has been necessary for our species' survival." "Survival?" Cassandra's voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "You killed billions of people." "I saved billions of people," Dr. Vex corrected gently. Humanity was destroying itself with its technological addiction, its environmental devastation, its endless wars. The electromagnetic pulse was surgical, it removed our ability to continue that self-destruction while leaving our biological systems intact. Zephyra stepped closer to examine the figure in the central chamber. "What about the zombies? How does reanimating the dead serve survival?" "The reanimated serve as a transitional population," Dr. Vex explained, her tone as casual as if she were discussing weather patterns. "They eliminate the weakest members of our species while providing motivation for the strongest to adapt and evolve. Those who survive the initial period prove themselves worthy of the next phase." Kalen found himself drawn to the monitoring equipment, his engineering background allowing him to interpret some of the data flowing across the screens. What he saw made his stomach clench with horror. "You're modifying human DNA," he said slowly. "These readings show genetic alterations in real time." "The figure in the chamber is my masterpiece," Dr. Vex said proudly. Human intelligence enhanced beyond current limitations, physical capabilities increased dramatically, and most importantly, complete immunity to the electromagnetic effects that disabled our technology. They can interface directly with quantum-based systems that operate beyond electromagnetic principles. Thaddeus had been studying the chamber's support systems, his experienced eye noting details the others missed. The power requirements for this facility alone would be enormous. How are you maintaining operations when every power grid on the planet is dead? Dr. Vex smiled, and for the first time, Kaelin detected something genuinely disturbing in her expression. I'm not using terrestrial power sources. The technology that made this project possible came from considerably farther away. The implications hit Kaelin like a physical blow. Extraterrestrial technology. That's why our understanding of electromagnetic principles was insufficient to predict the pulse effects. You're using physics beyond human comprehension. Beyond current human comprehension, Dr. Vex corrected. But the enhanced specimens will have no such limitations. They represent humanity's next evolutionary step, guided by intelligence that has already mastered the challenges we're only beginning to face. Lyralii had been unusually quiet throughout the exchange, but now she spoke up, her young voice cutting through the laboratory's ambient hum. The device we found in that zombie, it wasn't controlling the creature, was it? It was communicating with something else. Very perceptive, Dr. Vex acknowledged. The enhanced zombies serve as nodes in a communication network, gathering intelligence and coordinating activities across the global population. They're preparing the environment for the final phase of the transition. Cassander took a step forward, his hand moving toward the weapon at his belt. You're talking about replacing humanity entirely. This isn't evolution, it's extinction. Evolution and extinction are often indistinguishable from the perspective of the species undergoing the change, Dr. Vex replied calmly. But I assure you, what emerges will be recognizably human in all the ways that matter. Enhanced, but still human. The figure in the central chamber suddenly moved, its eyes opening to reveal pupils that swirled with patterns of light similar to those on the device they'd found. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate directly in their bones. The integration process is complete, it said, its gaze finding each of them in turn. The final phase can now begin. Dr. Vex turned to face her creation with the pride of a parent watching their child take first steps. Ladies and gentlemen, meet the first of the new humans. Enhanced reflexes, expanded cognitive capacity, and direct interface capability with our benefactor's technology. In 12 hours, the global release of the enhancement virus will begin. Humanity's childhood ends at dawn. The escape from Helix Corporation's underground facility became a nightmare of impossible choices and devastating losses. Dr. Vex had allowed them to leave, confident that her 12-hour timeline made any resistance meaningless, but the enhanced zombie population had apparently received different instructions. The moment they reached street level, coordinated groups of the undead began converging on their position with tactical precision that made Kaelin's blood run cold. Lyralii took point as they moved through the city's skeletal remains, her uncanny awareness of zombie movements now their only advantage against creatures that had apparently learned to set ambushes. The girl moved like a phantom through the urban wasteland, but even her skills couldn't compensate for the sheer numbers they faced. There, she whispered, pointing toward an overpass where dozens of zombies stood motionless, clearly waiting for their group to enter a kill zone. They're learning our routes. Adapting to our tactics. Thaddeus consulted his hand-drawn maps, searching for alternatives that wouldn't lead them directly into zombie concentrations. His fingers traced possible paths through the city, but each route seemed to dead-end at positions where the enhanced undead had established choke points. They're hurting us, he realized. Driving us toward something. Zephyra checked her crossbow's ammunition count, her medical training making her acutely aware of how inadequate their supplies were for extended combat. Whatever they're hurting us toward, we need to find another option. The virus release Dr. Vex mentioned, if that happens, this enhanced intelligence could spread to every zombie on the planet. Cassander had been growing increasingly agitated since leaving the facility, his usual confidence replaced by the desperate anger of someone who understood they were facing impossible odds. We should have killed her when we had the chance, he snarled. All this talking and trying to understand, meanwhile, she's about to murder what's left of humanity. She had that enhanced creature protecting her, Kalen reminded him. And the facility's automated defenses. We wouldn't have survived a direct assault. They took shelter in an abandoned subway station, the underground tunnels offering temporary respite from the zombie surveillance network above. But even here, they could hear the distant sounds of movement, the scraping of feet on concrete that suggested their pursuers were coordinating a systematic search pattern. Lyralii sat apart from the group, her young face drawn with exhaustion and something deeper, a weight that no child should have to carry. I can hear them talking, she said quietly. The enhanced ones. They're not just moaning anymore. They're using words. What kind of words? Zephyra asked, settling beside the girl with the protective instincts of someone who understood that preserving innocence had become a form of resistance against the horror surrounding them. Coordinates. Target descriptions. They're describing us individually: height, weight, clothing, weapons. Lyralii's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They know our names. The implication was staggering. The zombie network wasn't just tracking their movements, it was building detailed intelligence profiles on each survivor. The creatures were no longer mindless predators, they had become a surveillance system for whatever intelligence was coordinating Dr. Vex's plan. Thaddeus spread his maps on the tunnel floor, weighing their options with the methodical approach that had kept him alive through decades of engineering challenges. There's a possibility, he said slowly. The old sewage treatment plant has electromagnetic shielding that was designed to protect equipment from lightning strikes. If the zombie communication network relies on the same quantum-based systems Dr. Vex mentioned, that shielding might block their ability to coordinate. It's 12 miles from here, Cassander pointed out. Through zombie-controlled territory, with no guarantee that the shielding will actually work. Do we have a better option? Kalen asked. Because in 11 hours, this enhanced virus gets released globally. If we're going to do something to stop it, we need to move now. The journey toward the treatment plant became a running battle against an increasingly sophisticated enemy. The enhanced zombies had learned to use tools, setting traps and coordinating flanking maneuvers that forced the group to constantly adapt their tactics. Worse, they seemed to be learning from each encounter, adjusting their strategies in real time. It was during a firefight in an abandoned shopping mall that they lost Thaddeus. The older engineer had been covering their retreat when a group of enhanced zombies executed a pincer movement that cut him off from the rest of the group. His final words, shouted over the sound of combat, were coordinates for a backup route to the treatment plant. They found his body an hour later, but something was wrong. The zombies hadn't consumed him, they had left him intact, and when Zephyra checked for signs of life, she discovered bite marks that were already showing signs of the accelerated infection process Dr. Vex had described. He'll be back, Lyralii said with the matter-of-fact acceptance that had become her way of processing trauma. But he won't be him anymore. Cassander wanted to stay and destroy Thaddeus's body before reanimation could occur, but Kalen realized they couldn't afford the time. The enhanced infection process seemed to take only minutes rather than hours, and when Thaddeus opened his eyes, they held the same swirling patterns of light they'd seen in Dr. Vex's creation. The thing that had been Thaddeus spoke with his voice but carried none of his warmth. The integration is beautiful, it said, its gaze tracking them with predatory interest. You'll understand soon. All of humanity will understand when the enhancement is complete. They ran, leaving behind the man who had become their guide and protector, and Kalen couldn't shake the feeling that they had just witnessed a preview of humanity's future, familiar faces and voices twisted into something alien and terrible, convinced they were experiencing transcendence while becoming instruments of their species' destruction. The sewage treatment plant had been abandoned long before the zombie apocalypse, its electromagnetic shielding designed for an era when electrical storms posed the greatest threat to industrial equipment. As they approached the facility through pre-dawn darkness, Kalen couldn't shake the feeling that they were grasping at increasingly desperate straws. Even if the shielding blocked zombie communications, they still had no way to stop Dr. Vex's virus release. Lyralii confirmed that the facility was clear of undead, but her explanation was more troubling than reassuring. "They won't come closer than 200 meters, she reported. "It's like there's an invisible barrier they can't cross." "But they're not leaving either, they're setting up a perimeter." Inside the plant's main building, they found evidence that other survivors had discovered the electromagnetic sanctuary. Makeshift camps and supply caches suggested that perhaps dozens of people had used the facility as a refuge over the past months. But the camps were abandoned now, their occupants either dead or transformed into the very creatures they had been hiding from. Zephyra was treating a wound Cassander had sustained during their escape from the mall when she made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden beneath a loose floor panel in what had been the plant supervisor's office, she found a cache of documents that predated the apocalypse by almost 2 years. "These are internal Helix Corporation memos," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "They detail Project Lazarus from its inception, including fail-safes and contingency plans." Kalen studied the documents by lantern light, his engineering background helping him interpret the technical specifications. What he found was both encouraging and terrifying. Dr. Vex had built multiple safeguards into her system, but activating them would require access to the quantum-based communication network that controlled the enhanced zombies. "There's a master control protocol," he explained to the others. "Something called a Lazarus reversal that can terminate all enhanced subjects simultaneously. But it requires direct interface with the quantum communication system, and according to these specifications, that interface is lethal to unenhanced humans." Cassander looked up from cleaning his weapon, his expression grim. "So we need to become one of those things to stop them?" "Not necessarily," Lyralii said quietly. She had been studying a different set of documents, her young eyes picking out details the adults had missed. "There's something else here. Dr. Vex mentions natural quantum resonance in some subjects, people whose brain chemistry allows limited interface with the system without full enhancement." The implications hit Kalen immediately. "That's how you've been sensing zombie locations and movements. You're naturally sensitive to their communication network." The girl nodded, her green eyes reflecting a wisdom that seemed far too old for her age. "I've been hearing whispers since the first day of the outbreak. Voices that weren't quite voices, speaking in patterns instead of words. I thought I was going crazy." Zephyra's medical training kicked in as she began examining Lyralii for signs of enhancement virus infection, but the tests came back negative. The girl was human, but her brain exhibited the quantum resonance patterns that Dr. Vex had been trying to artificially create in her subjects. The interface process would still be dangerous, Kalen warned. Even with natural resonance, attempting to access the master control could cause irreversible brain damage. "And if we don't try, humanity gets turned into Dr. Vex's enhanced puppets," Lyralii replied with the calm logic of someone who had already accepted what needed to be done. "That's not really a choice at all." Outside, the zombie perimeter was growing larger and more organized. Through the facility's windows, they could see enhanced zombies setting up what appeared to be communication equipment, devices that operated despite the electromagnetic shielding, suggesting they worked on principles beyond current human understanding. "They're preparing for something," Cassander observed, his combat experience allowing him to read the tactical implications of the zombie positions. "Coordinating for a major operation." The timing clicked in Kalen's mind. The virus release. It's not just going to be airborne dispersal, they're planning to physically transport it to every major population center simultaneously. The enhanced zombies are positioning themselves to carry out a global distribution network. Dawn was approaching, painting the eastern sky with pale colors that reminded Kalen of better times when sunrise meant the beginning of another day instead of humanity's potential endpoint. According to Dr. Vex's timeline, they had less than 4 hours before the enhancement virus began its global release. Lyralii was studying the quantum interface specifications with the focused intensity of someone preparing for a mission she knew might be her last. "I'll need to get closer to their communication network," she said. "The plant's shielding is protecting me from full interface, but it's also limiting my access to the master control protocols." "Absolutely not," Zephyra said immediately. You're 13 years old. We'll find another way. There is no other way, Lyralii replied gently. And age doesn't matter anymore. The old world ended 3 months ago, and the new one needs someone to fight for it. She looked at each of them in turn, her young face set with determination. Besides, who else is going to do it? You? The cruel logic of their situation settled over them like a weight. In a world where technology had failed and monsters ruled the earth, their only hope for salvation lay in the hands of a child who possessed abilities that might kill her in the attempt to use them. The quantum interface device they constructed was a nightmare amalgamation of salvaged electronics and alien technology, built according to specifications that seemed to violate everything Kalen thought he knew about physics. Using components scavenged from the sewage plant's control systems and fragments of quantum resonance equipment found in the abandoned survivor camps, they created something that looked more like a medieval torture device than a piece of scientific equipment. Lyralii sat in the center of the makeshift apparatus, neural interface cables connected to points around her skull that Zephyra had located using medical charts cross-referenced with Dr. Vex's research notes. The girl's breathing was shallow but steady, her green eyes closed in concentration as she prepared to dive into a communication network that spanned the entire zombie population of Earth. I can feel them, she whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated strangely in the air around them. Millions of voices, all speaking in unison. They're so certain they're saving humanity by destroying it. Outside the treatment plant, the enhanced zombie forces had begun their final approach, no longer content to maintain their perimeter. Cassander and Zephyra had taken positions at strategic windows, their weapons trained on creatures that moved with military precision and tactical awareness. The old rules of zombie combat no longer applied, these enemies could think, plan, and coordinate their attacks. How much time do we need? Cassander called out as he sighted down his rifle barrel at what appeared to be a zombie commander directing the assault formations. Unknown, Kalen replied, monitoring the improvised equipment that was supposed to translate Lyralii's quantum resonance into actionable control signals. The interface process could take minutes or hours, and there's no guarantee it will work at all. The first wave of enhanced zombies reached the building's outer walls, and the sound of their coordinated breach attempts echoed through the facility like thunder. But these weren't the mindless creatures that had shambled through the streets in the early days of the outbreak. They were using tools, explosives, and tactical formations that suggested military training that had somehow survived the enhancement process. Lyralii's voice took on an otherworldly quality as her consciousness fully merged with the quantum network. I can see the virus dispensers, she reported, her words seeming to come from very far away. Thousands of them, positioned in every major city that still has surviving human populations. They're scheduled to activate in 93 minutes. Can you access the master control? Kalen asked, his fingers dancing over the interface controls that regulated the flow of quantum energy through Lyralii's brain. The readings were already showing dangerous levels of neural activity, but they had no choice but to push forward. It's protected, Lyralii replied, her young face contorting with effort. Dr. Vex built safeguards into the system. To access the Lazarus reversal, I need to provide authorization codes that prove I'm an enhanced human with administrative privileges. The building shook as explosives breached the main entrance, and Cassander's rifle began firing in short, controlled bursts. Each shot found its target, but there seemed to be an endless supply of enhanced zombies pouring through the opening. Worse, they were adapting to his shooting patterns, using cover and suppression tactics that made his defensive position increasingly untenable. Can you fake the authorization? Zephyra asked while reloading her crossbow, the medical precision that guided her healing work now applied to the placement of bolts in zombie skulls. Maybe, Lyralii said, her voice straining with the effort of maintaining her connection while fending off the system's security protocols. But it requires understanding the enhancement process from the inside. I'd have to let the virus partially infect me, just enough to generate the proper neural patterns. No, Kalen said immediately. The enhancement process is irreversible. Even partial infection would change you permanently. Would it still be me? Lyralii asked, her eyes still closed but tears streaming down her cheeks. If my mind stays intact but my body becomes enhanced, would I still be human enough to choose to save humanity? The question hung in the air like smoke from the battle raging around them. Enhanced zombies had broken through Cassandra's defensive line and were advancing toward the center of the facility, their movements coordinated and purposeful. In minutes, they would reach the quantum interface chamber. "Time's up," Cassandra shouted, falling back toward their position while laying down covering fire. "Whatever she's going to do, it has to be now." Lyralii opened her eyes, and for a moment they swirled with the same patterns of light they had seen in Dr. Vex's creation. "I'm going to try the partial enhancement," she said, her voice carrying new harmonics that made Kalen's spine tingle. "If I'm wrong about being able to resist full conversion, at least I'll be able to shut down the virus release before I lose myself completely." "Lyralii, no," Zephyra started to say, but the girl had already initiated the process, her consciousness diving deeper into the quantum network than any unenhanced human had ever attempted. The readings on Kalen's improvised equipment spiked into dangerous territory as enhancement virus began altering Lyralii's neural chemistry in real time. But instead of the complete transformation they had witnessed in other subjects, her natural quantum resonance seemed to be creating a hybrid state, enhanced cognitive abilities without the loss of human empathy and free will. "I can see it all," Lyralii whispered, her voice now carrying impossible harmonics. "The entire network, every zombie, every virus dispenser. And I can feel Dr. Vex watching through their eyes, so proud of what she's created." Her enhanced consciousness turned toward the master control protocols, administrative barriers crumbling before her new abilities. She never considered that someone might choose to use enhancement to destroy her work instead of completing it. The Lazarus reversal activated with a sound like reality tearing, and across the globe, every enhanced zombie simultaneously collapsed as their quantum-enhanced neural networks were forcibly disconnected. The virus dispensers went offline, their lethal cargo remaining sealed in containers that would never open. But in the quantum interface chamber of an abandoned sewage treatment plant, a 13-year-old girl paid the price for humanity's salvation. Her consciousness expanded beyond human limits but her heart still beating with the determination to protect the species she was no longer entirely part of. 6 months after the Lazarus reversal, Kalen stood on the roof of the treatment plant and watched the sunset paint the sky in colors that reminded him of hope instead of apocalypse. The zombie threat had ended with Lyralii's sacrifice, their enhanced intelligence network severed permanently, leaving only the shambling remnants of the original outbreak to be systematically cleared by growing groups of organized survivors. Humanity was rebuilding, slowly and carefully, with a newfound respect for the fragility of technological civilization. Communities were forming around principles of sustainability and resilience rather than endless growth and consumption. The electromagnetic pulse effects had finally begun to fade, allowing some basic electronics to function again, but society seemed reluctant to rebuild the complex technological infrastructure that had made them so vulnerable. Lyralii was alive, but changed in ways that couldn't be easily categorized. The partial enhancement had left her with capabilities that existed somewhere between human and post-human, enhanced cognitive processing, direct interface ability with quantum-based systems, and perceptions that extended beyond normal sensory range. She aged more slowly now, her 13-year-old body maintained by enhancement virus modifications that seemed to have stabilized rather than progressed. She spent most of her time in the facility's lower levels, monitoring quantum communication frequencies that still carried faint traces of Dr. Vex's network. The older woman had vanished during the Lazarus reversal, her enhanced creation dissolved along with every other modified subject, but Lyralii insisted she could still sense something out there, a presence watching and waiting. "She's not gone," Lyralii said during one of their evening conversations, her enhanced eyes reflecting starlight in patterns that human eyes couldn't duplicate. Dr. Vex uploaded herself into the quantum network before the reversal. "She's dispersed now, scattered across energy patterns that exist between dimensions, but she's learning how to reconstitute herself." Zephyra had established a medical clinic in a nearby town, using her knowledge of enhancement virus effects to help survivors deal with the long-term psychological trauma of the outbreak. Cassander had found his calling as a coordinator for survivor communities, his combat experience and natural leadership helping organize defense networks and resource distribution systems. But it was Thaddeus who haunted Kaylan's dreams. They had found his body after the reversal, reverted to human death but bearing the scars of his brief time as an enhanced zombie. The man who had guided them through the apocalypse's darkest moments had experienced firsthand the horror of consciousness trapped in an alien framework, and his final expression suggested he had understood exactly what was happening to him. Kaylan had become something of a technology philosopher for the rebuilding communities, helping them understand which innovations were worth pursuing and which represented the kind of dangerous dependence that had made the electromagnetic pulse so devastating. He worked with teams of survivors to develop electronics that could function independently of global networks, creating resilient systems that couldn't be weaponized against the people who depended on them. The photo of Dr. Morvain Vex still sat on his desk, a reminder that scientific ambition without ethical constraints could justify any atrocity in the name of progress. According to documents they had recovered from the Helix facility, she had genuinely believed that replacing human civilization with enhanced post-human entities was an act of salvation rather than extinction. As winter approached, Lyralii had grown more insistent that something was coming. Her enhanced perceptions detected patterns in quantum fluctuations that suggested Dr. Vex was beginning to reassemble herself, learning to exist as a distributed consciousness that could manipulate reality at the subatomic level. "She'll be back," Lyralii told him during their last conversation before her disappearance. "But when she returns, she won't need physical form or technological infrastructure. She'll be something entirely new, a digital goddess with the power to reshape matter and energy according to her vision." Lyralii had vanished 3 weeks ago, leaving only a note explaining that she was going to hunt Dr. Vex through quantum dimensions that human language couldn't adequately describe. Her enhanced abilities had apparently progressed to the point where she could exist partially outside normal spacetime, pursuing an enemy that had transcended physical existence entirely. Kaylan kept watch for both of them, knowing that humanity's survival might ultimately depend on the outcome of a battle being fought in realms beyond human comprehension. The world was healing from the zombie apocalypse, but greater threats lurked in the spaces between dimensions where evolved intelligences waged wars that could reshape reality itself. On clear nights, when quantum fluctuations created aurora-like patterns in the sky that normal humans couldn't see, Kaylan sometimes caught glimpses of lights moving in impossible formations, suggesting that the war between enhanced girl and digital goddess continued somewhere beyond the edge of perception. Humanity had survived its technological adolescence and learned to build civilization that could endure. But the universe was vast and filled with intelligences that viewed human existence as either an opportunity or an obstacle, and the young guardian who protected them now fought battles in dimensions where the very concept of human identity might not survive intact. The species would endure, Kaylan believed, but the price of that survival might be measured in the gradual transformation of everything that had once defined what it meant to be human. In saving humanity, Lyralii had perhaps begun the process of evolving beyond it, and somewhere in the quantum foam between realities, the future of consciousness itself hung in the balance between competing visions of transcendence and extinction.